listening to the Philanthropisms podcast with Rodri Davis. Hello, you're listening to the Philanthropisms podcast. This is the podcast where we try to put philanthropy in context. I'm your host, as ever, Rodri Davis, and we are back after a short break over the festive season. A happy new year to all of you, or Blwyddyn Newydd Dda, as they say in my homeland of Wales. Hope everybody managed to have a break of some sort and is refreshed and renewed for the year ahead, which I think it's fair to say promises to throw up plenty of challenges as well as hopefully some opportunities. Here on the podcast, we've got lots of great guests lined up and interesting topics to tackle, some of which I've planned out, and no doubt there'll be many more that present themselves throughout the course of the year. And we're going to kick things off in 2025 with the 8th in our series in partnership with the European Research Network on Philanthropy, or ERNOP, where I talk to academics whose work has been featured in the latest release of ERNOP research notes, with a kind of practitioner-focused summaries of academic research that's out there. And I always get a chance to talk to people about work that's been featured and find out what's going on in the world of academia in Europe around philanthropy, which is always really fascinating. And this month is no different. So in this episode, we are joined by a number of academics. So first up, we've got Dr. Marlene Valk from the University of Freiburg in Germany, and also Jamie Levine-Daniel, who is an associate professor at New York University, at the Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. And they're talking about their paper, Message Incongruence, Tweeting While Competing for Donations, which they wrote also with Callie Curley. Then next up, we've got Michael Meijer, who's a PhD candidate at Radboud University in the Netherlands. And Michael is talking about his paper, Assessing the Why in Volunteering for Refugees, Exploring Volunteer Motivations, which he wrote with Marcel Lubbers and Pierre Schepers. And then finally, we've got Noelia Salido Andres, who is an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Coruña. And she is talking about a paper called When the Winner Takes It All, Online Campaign Factors Influencing the Success of Donation-Based Crowdfunding for Charitable Causes, which she co-authored with Marta Rey Garcia, Luis Ignacio Alvarez Gonzalez, and Rodolfo Vasquez Casieles. So without further ado, let's get into those conversations. I'll give a brief introduction to each of the segments and then go into the interviews, and then I'll be back at the end for the usual bit of housekeeping and tidying up. So first, we're going to hear from Marlene Valk from the University of Freiburg and Jamie Levine-Daniel talking about their paper, Message Incongruence, Tweeting While Competing for Donations. So here's Marlene and Jamie. Okay, great. Well, I'm here with Jamie Levine-Daniel and Marlene Valk. Hello to both of you.
Hello. Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on the podcast. So this is one of our ERNOP special episodes where we talk to people working in the field of academic studies around nonprofits and philanthropy. And the paper that we're here to talk about is a paper that you were both involved in co-authoring with the title Message Incongruence, Tweeting While Competing for Donations, which is a really interesting look at what actually goes on when nonprofits use social media, and particularly Twitter, now known as X, in trying to solicit donations from the general public. So without me sort of saying any more, perhaps you could say a little bit about what the paper is, what the kind of key findings were in it.
Sure, I'll take it. What we were looking at were nonprofits in a definitively competitive environment. So these were nonprofits that were placed head to head in a competition. Think like a FIFA bracket, like a World Cup bracket. And so we wanted to see if messaging mattered and how connecting on social media and pleas for donations affected the donations that these organizations actually received. And what we were specifically interested in this case is this idea of competition, the impact of competition in a head-to-head where you are literally competing for donations. Does your messaging around that matter? There's been a lot of research about framing how to request donations generally. We were curious about whether this element of competition and direct competition had an impact when it came to what organizations said and how they tried to rally their donors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Marlena, in terms of, what the actual design was of the study and how you went about getting the findings.
Sure. So we worked with a nonprofit organization that was located in Indianapolis. Back then, all the co-authors were in Indianapolis, and they were running this competition. And so we were given a lot of information that they collected from the competing organizations, such as their size, their number of volunteers, their everything we would need to kind of like have it as part of the model. And they also instructed the organizations who competed in the tournament to use certain kind of hashtags on Twitter. And so we were able to pull those hashtags and those tweets from Twitter to then analyze them. So we coded the tweets with the hashtags from those organizations, and three different dimensions emerged. So there is kind of like a general plea for donations, and then there's a more competitive plea for donations that emerged. And then the third one
was more of the gamesmanship. So it wasn't the competition, but it was the be our MVP, be our most valuable player, get off the bench and help us. So it was this collaboration theme as opposed to help us beat the other team. And the way we were able to kind of see the connection to the donations was the main organization that was administering the tournament had a donation timeline. So we could match within a frame, we could match when a tweet was sent to the donation activity, within say 10 minutes or so, I think was our window.
Yeah, and I thought one of the things that was really interesting about the research was, in terms of your hypotheses, I think given that the context was, as you say, explicitly competitive, you might think that appeals to competition or using the language of sport would work. And actually, I think you found that it was negatively correlated with people being willing to give.
Yes, this has been a theme. So I do want to acknowledge our third author on this paper, Dr. Callie Carley from the University of Miami. We have a couple of other papers that came out of this study, including one that identified or furthered this idea of dissonance, where nonprofits and donors and stakeholders kind of don't want to admit to competition. It seems to be like a dirty word, if you will, where even in this direct competition where you are literally head to head, again, World Cup bracket, head-to-head competition, you would get this wishy-washy, like, oh, we don't really compete, we collaborate, we're all trying to solve problems. This is a function of a lot of things, some of which we've studied and some of it was sort of out of our scope, but this sort of when you're competing for funds, but then you also have to sit across the table and try to address the same problems in your community. How do you balance those things? And there seems to be this idea, this wholesome idea of philanthropy and altruism and doing good. We don't want to sort of muddy those waters with this negative connotation of competition. And we're not the first ones to find this. Ziva Sharp, I believe, in 2018 identified the dissonance, but it was really evident in this paper and some of our others that we just don't acknowledge competition in the nonprofit space.
And we did find this in several ways. So when we collected some other data with people who participated and have some qualitative information too, where people basically said, no, that's not what we do, even though they signed up to play in this competition. It was very interesting and as you mentioned, counterintuitive to us.
And do you think that, I was trying to get my head around this, do you think it's partly that people don't mind the competitive framing when that is sort of externally imposed on non-profits, but when the non-profits themselves seem as though they're showing the same spirit and starting to compete, that then people don't like that and there's a kind of cognitive dissonance for them there?
I think they don't like it whether it's externally imposed or whether the nonprofits themselves send it. Because again, even in a non-competitive setting, you see, I mean, nonprofits compete all the time. I think it's a fact that gets largely ignored. And maybe this speaks to some of the practical implications. But when we ignore the competition element of an environment, I mean, nonprofits are competing for donors, for government funds, for clients and program beneficiaries. And so it does a disservice and kind of paints an inadequate picture of the environment in which nonprofits are competing and what its impact on resource acquisition and service delivery. But at the same time, there seems to be a distinct discomfort with this idea of, altruism and doing good on the one hand, and the sort of negative elements of competition and what that actually, no, we're doing good. We don't compete. We're all one big happy family, when that's not underneath, that's not actually the case. And even in an explicit competition. This is several years on from doing some of this work. And we've had, I think 3 papers come out of this, and we still sometimes are like, but you're competing. Like, it's a direct competition. We're not even hypothetically or trying to get you to think competing for donors is competitive, right? This is literally a head-to-head.
Yeah, and I think that the fact it's so explicit makes it really, really interesting, and the fact that people still then feel this sense that they don't want to admit that that's the reality for organizations competing for resources. I guess you mentioned there about the question of sort of practical and policy implications, given that in most contexts, nonprofits, are competing, but not as explicitly as in the framework of a sort of head-to-head competition. What do you think are the key sort of insights that they can take from this work in terms of how they present the work that they do on social media most effectively?
Well, I think messaging matters. I've got some other work with Adam Ecker that shows, donors specifically coming to GuideStar are looking or respond to certain messaging that may be different from, for example, social media, who's your audience and how long do you have their attention for? Which is a really interesting question, especially given, we wrote this paper about Twitter before Twitter changed its name. And then by the time it came out, we were like, Twitter's not really the thing anymore. It's not, especially what we studied, but now, especially with the growth of Blue Sky, some of these other platforms, that idea and the chronological, there's no algorithm, for example, on Blue Sky. So even though that's growing exponentially, how are you going to get their attention? And you have to do it in the moment. So who's your audience? How long do you have their attention for? What message is going to resonate? And is it a different message on social media with a general blast than, for example, GuideStar or like a more specific donor-oriented or government funding-oriented application?
And I'd like to add one thing, because what we found in this paper, and as well as in another related project, is basically that organizational characteristics almost don't matter as much in terms of the performance online on social media. So even smaller organizations and those who do not have as many, monetary assets or not as many staff members, they can perform as well in terms of donations than others, which we think is actually a good thing. So it's more about
a great point.
Yeah, reach, how connected are they on social media? So it almost equalizes the playing field a little bit.
Yeah, it democratizes the ask. So putting some money, time, effort into the social media management, for example, being intentional in your strategy. If you have limited time and resources on the organizational side, limited time, resources, capacity, this is a worthwhile investment, maybe even especially for smaller organizations, because it does expand that reach.
Yeah, I thought I'd noticed that in the paper, and I thought it was really interesting because it reminded me that 10 years or so ago, when I was using Twitter in the slightly more utopian days, that's the thing that always struck me, was smaller organizations could amplify their voices in a way that seemed almost impossible through traditional media. And maybe over time, as it became more heavily determined by the algorithm, that was less the case. So it will be very interesting to see, as we shift onto new platforms, whether we return to some of that. I wanted to ask more broadly, because obviously you mentioned there, the research for this paper came about through a partnership that you had with an organization working in the nonprofit space. And one of the sort of running themes through this podcast series is about what those links are like between academia and practice. And obviously, in one of the directions it travels is academics working with nonprofits in order to get data and insights for their research, but also what then happens in the other direction? How easy is it to disseminate findings? What's your sense at the moment of, or what's your experience of those two different kinds of interactions between practice and academia at the moment?
So for this particular project, that came out of an ask to our co-author, Callie Curley, who was teaching program evaluation, and the organization actually approached her to help them figure out parts of the effectiveness and efficiency of their programs, and we then teamed up with her and helped kind of like along the way for multiple years to help them with their survey design, like what they'd asked organizations before they enrolled in the tournament and stuff like that. And that was really, I think, for us also beneficial, right? So because it was a new kind of like a new type of organization, having this competition, which was very innovative. So for us being able to work with this organization was helpful, obviously, because we got research out there, but I think they also benefited from working with us because we could really help them modify some of the tools and bring some of the, academic thinking into their practices. So I don't know, Jamie, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think it's really important not to think of it as a one-way taking relationship. So in addition to helping them with their surveys and them coming to us with the original ask, we did things like YouTube tutorials for how to fill out the application and how to participate, and possibly tips for success. There's still one up, I believe, at least of me talking about how to use the process and the platform. And so really just making sure how can, obviously we're going to benefit, but how can we be of assistance to you, right? Is it writing up reports? Is it speaking to your participants? Is it running? We also did an online sort of game lessonly type thing, which was little online classes or webinars, if you will, that they used to help teach their participants sort of how to maximize participation in the tournament. So we used what we learned from previous years to kind of pay it forward and provide knowledge and tangible products for them that were of benefit to the organization and their participants.
That's really interesting, because one of the things I've heard through talking to people in this series is a concern that sometimes it's easy for the relationship to become quite extractive if you just see the nonprofits as sort of sources of data for your own research, and vice versa. So I think that sounds really productive.
It's also a check, right? It's a gut check. It's hey, here's what we're seeing. Are you seeing this? Does this make sense to you? What do you think might be explaining? We can look to the literature, like with this cognitive dissonance, we can look to the literature all we want, but, does that actually make sense? Does that play out? Does that resonate? So I think that's also a really important element.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the other thing I always notice with these is, the work I'm talking to people about, the papers themselves, and certainly the research has often happened quite a while before I get around to talking to people. So you've probably moved on to other things. So just be really interested to hear from both of you what you're working on now that either follows on from this or kind of what your kind of main areas of interest are at the moment.
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, Jamie and I still collaborate together. So we have a bigger project that we just 2 weeks ago presented at a conference together on justice philanthropy, where we study how community foundations move towards racial justice, and also how they weather the storm of the political environment. And so that's been very interesting. So we kind of extended our collaborations from back when we met at our old university, and are still collaborators, but very much still engaged with organizations. So for this project I just mentioned, we did interviews and did an observational study with some community foundations that were part of a network. And so very much still the same kind of approach, working and learning with organizations and from organizations.
In addition to that project, I will just say I'm continuing my work on a cross-border philanthropy project, looking at donations from U.S. INGOs to Israeli nonprofits, which was featured in another ERNOP research note write-up, I believe, last year, and continues to be super timely in these moments. I think the through line for the research that Marlene and I do is this relevance and timeliness, even though it does take a long time. Like I said, Twitter stopped existing in the form that we studied it in by the time the paper came out. But looking at those super relevant issues and working with organizations and the people that are actually doing the work is a through line through most of our projects.
Great. Yeah, I mean, that comes across really clearly, and it's really interesting to hear. Listen, just remain safe. Thanks ever so much to both of you for finding some time to come on the podcast. It's great to hear about this piece of research, and certainly we'll keep an eye out for further bits of research in the future.
Thank you for the opportunity to highlight this project.
Thank you.
And next we're going to hear from Michael Meijer from Radboud University in the Netherlands, talking about his research into volunteering for refugees and what it is that motivates people doing that. So let's hear from Michael. Okay, great. Well, I'm here with Michael Meijer. Hi there, Michael.
Hi, Rodri. Thank you.
Oh, no, thanks very much for finding time to come on the podcast. So, yeah, we're here to talk about a paper that you've got featured in the most recent ERNOP Research Notes series. And the paper is called Assessing the Why in Volunteering for Refugees, Exploring Volunteer Motivations. So maybe you could tell us a bit, what the research is all about and what the key findings in the paper are.
Yes. So the paper is about volunteering for refugees and really among starting groups of volunteers. So this was a paper originally not planned, but due to some big events in the world, it kind of became a chance for us to ask these volunteers why they volunteer for refugees. It is good to know that in the area of Nijmegen, so close to the German border, there was a refugee camp opened for Afghan refugees. And well, that really led to a so-called volunteer energy in the city of Nijmegen and its surroundings. So we had to do something with that, with all those volunteers that wanted to reach out to the refugees who were sitting in the camp. It was COVID that time. That was a challenge, but we managed to have some focus groups, most of them in person, some of them online, with the volunteers. And basically asking them a very simple format, basically asking them, okay, why are you volunteering for refugees? And we kind of mirrored it to the volunteer function inventory, the VFI, which is a quite important motivational framework on why people volunteer. And we specified this for refugees. And we also applied triangulation through interviews with the volunteer coordinators to see if they also could identify some motivations that the volunteers themselves did not want to mention for any kind of reasons. So that's the background. The findings are what we found was that the understanding function of the VFI was very important. And this means that volunteers volunteer also because they can learn something of the experience, try to learn from other cultures, or really the hands-on work. That gives them many tools that they can use in other aspects of their life. So the understanding function was very important, and also not surprisingly the values function, so that they are compassionate that they show compassion to the refugees, so that they really want to care for people in need. And the other thing that we also found were unpopular motivations. For the story, I think it is best to focus on the VFI here, because that was our main theoretical idea for the paper, is that the social function wasn't popular at all. So meaning I volunteer because my friends do, was totally unimportant for all the volunteers. And also the career perspective, so for resume building, for instance, wasn't popular at all. But that was also based on the sample. So we had a quite older sample, older volunteers. And then the career perspective isn't relevant anymore. The few youngsters that we had, however, they said that it was relevant for them. So we see some kind of age duality going on there. Going to the last part of the findings, we also found some important motivations that were not covered by the VFI, but popped up in the focus groups and in the interviews. And that is volunteering to seek for a meaningful role in life, so the meaningfulness of the work. Also, we call it the pragmatism of the work, so that you almost immediately, I would say, see the results of your work. So it is very visible. It's very visible work, and that also gives a satisfying experience to the volunteers. Also, the media exposure that really triggers volunteers. So this was, of course, what I sometimes use is that the global literally became local. So we had a very global event going on. And that was that the Taliban seized to power in Afghanistan, and several governments had to evacuate people from Afghanistan. These people were sheltered only a few kilometers away from the campus of the university in a forest. So suddenly for those people here in Nijmegen and area, it became very local. A very global event became very local in their own in their own lives, in their own areas where they live. And we saw that this media exposure that it generated, that really triggered some people to discover, okay, what's going on there? And I want to help because I feel the need, because the media also gives so much attention to it. So that is the third one. And the last one is the emotional dimension. That's what we call it. And that is that the volunteers have, maybe similar stories of fleeing or know people who had to flee to other countries. So that this personal experiences. That is basically, in a nutshell, the findings. Last thing to add, maybe there, is that volunteer coordinators also added the importance of the protective function of the VFI, and that means that volunteers also try to use this volunteering to deal with their own problems, such as loneliness, or what we also saw, that they use this type of volunteering to take a step back into society after burnout, illness, or dismissal. So they also use it to take a step back into society, so to say.
Yeah, really, really interesting. And just picking up on a couple of those things. The first one I wanted to ask about was, you talked there about the responses to media coverage being part of the story. And I wondered, because often migration is a story that's covered quite critically or negatively in some parts of the media, and also political narratives can often be quite negative. The way in which media influenced the volunteers you were speaking to, was it that they were positively influenced just by awareness that this was happening near to them? Or did you get any sense that some of them had heard negative narratives and almost wanted to challenge those through their own volunteering?
Very good question. And exactly this duality is what we found. So on the one hand, the media coverage also stresses the need of the urgency of the situation. So people were also triggered by that they found, okay, this is a very urgent situation. We need to help right now. And let's say that the geographical space also makes responsible. So meaning that the people from Nijmegen, they felt that it was their responsibility because it's they were living close to the camp. So people from Amsterdam, they're not going to help. That's too far away. So they felt a response in a geographical way, triggered by the media. But exactly the other thing is also true. So very shortly before the camp opened, there were some protests in another small town in the Netherlands of an asylum seeker center that was opened, and the local population, well, some of them, they protested. And there were volunteers in the focus groups who say, I decided to volunteer for refugees out of a counter reaction to these protests. So as a statement, as kind of a signal that there are also good people in the Netherlands, and so exactly what you say, like this counter response.
Interesting. And I wanted to ask sort of slightly more on the methodological point, and you touched on this a bit, that one of the challenges always where you're trying to get at people's motivations for volunteering or for giving is that one of, people are not necessarily good at identifying their own motivations, or what they think motivates them might be different from what actually does. And there's all the sort of social desirability bias. You mentioned that you spoke to the volunteer coordinators as well as a means of trying to sort of unearth some of those hidden motivations. Did you feel as though that was a challenge as you were going on, that what people said was motivating them, you had to be slightly, if not skeptical, to be kind of careful and view that critically?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what we also tried in the focus groups is try to sample for 6 to 8 persons, so that there is a variety of perspectives on the one hand, and on the other hand, the group becomes not too big. I found that sometimes volunteers find it difficult to really describe their motivation. So sometimes if the first volunteer told his or her motivation, and then the other ones came, and then everybody responded, and then the first volunteer said, "Oh, I want to go back to my motivation because the person over there was saying it more precisely. So that's how I should define it as well." So I noticed that. Coming back to your question, like signs of loneliness. Volunteers are not really happy to say that in a focus group setting, I would say. So that is really a finding coming from triangulation. The illness, burnout and stuff, that was already in the focus groups. That was found in both settings of study. But definitely the loneliness aspect, was only raised by the coordinators.
Yeah, really interesting. And the final thing I just wanted to ask you about this before asking some sort of broader questions is, what you were doing in the research obviously was kind of trying to use the framework of the VFI to look at the motivations with the volunteers that you were talking to. Did you get a sense at the end of it that there is anything distinctive or unique about volunteering with refugees as a form of volunteering in terms of what motivates people, or is it sort of a subset of the wider motivations for volunteering?
Well, what we noticed also in this research, maybe also in other studies, is that the group of volunteers for refugees usually is a quite unique group, I would say, because they volunteer usually for outgroups in society, so for the minorities. This can also be a result of the way that we collected the data, so we did it in Dutch. I mostly had Dutch volunteers in my focus groups or other data collections, so maybe there is a bias going on over there. That could be because of the way that we collected the data. But so for these groups that I had in my data collection, you can really say that they volunteer for outgroups, for minorities in society. So that is really a unique feature, I would say, of this group. And I think, what coming back to your question, I think that this interest in other cultures, this try to see how they deal with their problems, that's a quote that I use now from one of the volunteers, that really marks this special group of volunteers, that they really want to see how other cultures respond to problems in their life, I would say.
Yeah, really interesting. And I guess following on from that, what is your view of kind of what this research can offer in terms of insights, maybe for practitioners or people who are looking to apply what you found?
What we also found, this was a refugee camp. That's quite a specific situation because it's a very temporary situation. Most of the volunteers really do this for a very temporary time. So they know this is an urgent situation. I'm going all the way for 2 to 3 months, and then I pick up my own life again, almost saying it like this. So most of the volunteers do not have the intention to do this on a regular basis or to be recruited by organizations that there is some sustainability in it. So the challenge that we saw for the involved organizations was try to keep them, try to retain them. That was very difficult because most of the volunteers were not interested in that. They responded to the urgency of the situation, and after a while, the urgency kind of disappeared because we were several months further, and then they quit it and moved on with their life.
Yeah, I'd say that's really interesting. And sort of more broadly, obviously, in terms of doing this research, you were engaging with practitioners and with volunteers. What is your experience and your sense of how well the links function between practice and academia around philanthropy, but both in terms of you finding information and data for your research and in terms of you disseminating your findings? Do you find that it's easy to do that?
That is not really my experience, that it is very easy. So also for the volunteers, for instance, most of them didn't even know what the others were doing. So there was not a sense of unity. And the focus groups, many volunteers indicated, was the first way that volunteers could interact with each other on this topic. So it was a very ad hoc situation. Also for the involved organizations was really ad hoc. Of course, there is some policy, but the urgency of the situation was that critical that there wasn't almost time to overthink everything really well. I hope that answers your question a bit, but it was very ad hoc, so there wasn't really a structure that I could dive into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess in terms of what's always useful to ask people, I think, what it is that they're working on now, because I'm aware often that the research that they've done has happened a reasonable while in the past. So are you doing work that kind of builds on this research, or have you started looking at other areas? And if so, what are those?
I'm still building on this research. So actually the research we're discussing here marked a cooperation with the largest Dutch refugee aid organization in the Netherlands. So we did some more studies. This focused on starting volunteering. We also dealt with the question, okay, how do you retain your volunteers? And at the moment, that is the closing step. but also the closing step of the cycle is why people quit. So that's all in the same organization, not necessarily in the same setting. So it's not about temporary refugee camps anymore, but now more at asylum seeker centers, for instance, so other things. But still the sustainability question and this discontinuity in volunteering for refugees.
Yeah, really interesting. And I say, huge practical relevance for organizations that are trying to understand how to retain and to stop people burning out or leaving. So, yeah, really interesting to hear, and I'll be interested to see the findings of those when they're available. Michael, just remains to say thanks ever so much for finding time to come on the podcast. Really interesting to hear about your work, and wish you all the best for the future.
Thank you very much.
And then last but not least, in the final segment, we're going to hear from Noelia Salido-Andres about her research into the factors that influence the success of donation-based crowdfunding for charitable causes. So let's hear from Noelia. Okay, great. Well, I'm here with Noelia Salido-Andres. Hello there.
Hi, how are you doing?
Great, thank you. I'm very glad that you could join me. And yeah, we're here to talk about a paper that you've got featured in the latest release of ERNOP research notes. The paper in question is titled "When the Winner Takes It All, Online Campaign Factors Influencing the Success of Donation-Based Crowdfunding for Charitable Causes." So the name obviously tells people, I think, quite a lot, but maybe you could tell us a bit about what the research is about and what some of the key findings in it were.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. This paper is, in the context of new alternative funding tools used for nonprofits. It's the third outcome of my dissertation, in which basically I analyzed how nonprofits and charitable organizations are using are optimizing social marketing with the use of new tools and mechanisms to struggling with a period of economic strains. So in this paper we specifically try to analyze the explanatory capacity of campaign factors specifically. In the first paper, in the first study of this dissertation, we we check the explanatory capacity of line factors that historically and traditionally were affecting the success of crowdfunding. But in this third one, we want to know if there are if factors specifically of the campaigns online, in the online sphere, are affecting the success or not. So we made a literature review. We refuted these the factors that the academic attention, was remarking. And we wonder about the explanatory capacity of the disclosure of the campaign, basically the use of narrative, even the length of the narrative used, okay, and also the imagery of the campaign. So those campaigns using photos or using videos in the campaign data sheets in a platform are more keen to be successful or not. And we also wonder on the accountable behavior. Basically, how the information about the advances of the campaign, how this transparency and symmetry in the information can influence the success. And then lastly, we wonder about the social media dissemination, or spreading of the campaign. One important thing is to contextualize this this, the data collection and also the publication, we're talking about a paper that, and a dissertation that used data from a national electronic digital platform of crowdfunding in Spain during a 5-year period from 2012 to 2017. So now we are living in another world. Because it was pre-pandemic, but not also because of the pre-pandemic, also because of the accelerated revolution in digital tools and so on. And we basically find that the results indicate that narrative is not important, and neither the use of pictures or videos are important. So this was in contradiction with the insights reflected by previous literature, and we conclude that basically in a world, again in a pre-pandemic world, the multimedia inputs or this kind of visual and graphical inputs were not so important for people, because basically we are subjected to plenty of stimulus of detail, narrative, graphic character every single day, every single hour. So this is not the kind of dimension in which basically potential donors put the focus on. Okay, and of course, the spreading of the campaigns in social media was, an insight that was completely confirmed. We can conclude that Facebook. Okay, so we were talking about, the Pleistocene. Facebook was basically the platform in which, successful campaigns were more spread. And the most, maybe not the most important, but the most, attractive, at least in my opinion, finding here was the importance of the organizational behavior. Potential donors are rewarded, or in base of our results, they reward those organizations that provide information, not asked before, voluntarily provide information, not just in the pre-event, in the pre-campaign, but also in the meantime the campaign is running, and very importantly, at the end of the campaign. And this kind of information we collect data from near 400 campaigns of this national intermediary platform, and the amount of or the level of the campaigns providing post-campaign information was absolutely residual. So during this, period of 2012, 2017, nonprofits, most of them small and medium size, I need to say, they were not used to do that. They were used to, create a storytelling about the campaign, the cause, if it was a social exclusion, or childhood or environmental cause, whatever, even also about the end beneficiaries, because also, to put the face or to describe a personal story and so on can move people to action. But to provide information during the campaign and once the campaign finishes is something that they were not used to do. And people, at least at that time, when we collect the data, are rewarding this more and more. So, this has a lot of implications for nonprofits, basically because, the playground is completely different now. So they need to, for sure, not just to create a one-day event, because the content, the campaigns, the results, the behavior of nonprofits during all the campaigns they host in the media or in the platforms are live during a long time. So people just can, they actually we personally scrutinize how a specific nonprofit behaved in the past with some campaigns. So this is something they need to, for sure, guarantee, and they also have to, to create new narratives and control, for sure, the discussion and the conversations in online. But for sure, to be prepared, to be ready, to volunteer, to be proactive in the provision of information.
It's really, really interesting. And you mentioned there, obviously, that the context around social media has changed very rapidly, and since this data was initially collected. Do you have any sense of whether non-profit organizations or those using crowdfunding platforms have learned some of these lessons for themselves? Do you think they have got better at reporting to donors and seeing that as the thing that will drive engagement? Or do you think actually the context maybe has shifted and the emphasis on what is valuable or what has an impact is maybe different now than it was then?
I think it depends on the size, and also depends, on the scenario. I mean, the legal scenario and also the institutional scenario of charitable sector in every country. I mean, for instance, in Spain, the field of nonprofits are crowded of small and medium-sized nonprofits. You ask me about, for instance, the big ones. I mean, talking about Red Cross or Spanish Red Cross or Caritas and so on. They for sure are very, are assuming all these changes, even in a proactive way, because they are huge. They have amazing resources. They have the opportunity to collaborate, to establish partnerships with other actors, and even co-create. These big ones can even co-create value and co-create products and services with the end beneficiaries or even with potential donors. So they are disrupting the way they are behaving and living this new world. But if we're thinking all the nonprofits that are small and need support and resources from others, they are in a very disadvantageous situation. So maybe one solution for these small and medium-sized nonprofits are, for instance, establishing partnerships. These can, be a kind of solution to integrate new ways of doing, and also to learn and to attract new talent in terms of digital capabilities, or even community management strategies and so on. But for sure, I mean, talking about today, I mean, in the current days, they are a very asymmetric position between different nonprofits. I'm thinking, for instance, the recent floods in Spain with the donors. I don't know if you heard about it. There were a huge floods water in October in Valencia. So there were, near 300 deaths and plenty of disasters. And the administration and governments and public institutions were like, not shocked, but very, they were not active. They were not proactive. So again, as happened in pandemic and other, pandemic was the most important. Actually, it was huge, but the first to move on to action were basically people. So they find people, neighbors, other citizens have the capacity to be involved, to organize themselves, and to start to do things, to start to prepare food and other kind of in-kind products and so on, collect them, and so again, 10 years after this paper, again the pandemic, again this environmental disaster here in Spain shows again that people has a more quick reaction, in a very random way. And they are, the first one to start to, mobilize to decrease or to reduce the consequence. And then came institutions, and then came, non-profits. And for instance, in this disaster of October in Spain, there are a lot of conversations in media, and people were asking for help in media, in Twitter, X, or whatever it calls now. And basically there were also people that was, denouncing how non-profits, big ones non-profits, were using the money, using the resources. So basically, you are not here, ERNOP is not here, institutions are not here, politicians are not here, and you, big one, non-profit organizations, you are neither here because your staff are accommodated in the best hotels in the city, and you are not, in the street, helping to remove all the disaster and so on. So this can for sure increase the reputational risks for nonprofits. And also today we have plenty of new risks because we have, for instance, generative artificial intelligence, which basically, if you are not controlling all these new tools and devices, anyone can, reproduce, modulate, create from nothing a new voice, a new narrative, and put you in trouble. So actually, in resume, today I think nonprofits are making largely the same mistakes as before, and just in the case they are absolutely huge with a lot of capabilities and resources in access, they can improve. But people, technology, and the conversations in social media, in online, are flowing faster than the reaction capability of nonprofits.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think, it has just changed dramatically, but I think, if anything, the question of how people use these forms of crowdfunding and platform-based giving are more important than ever, because so much giving is going in that direction. I just wanted to ask, actually, because obviously this piece of work, the research, and then the publication, as ever with these things, there is a time lag. So it's a few years ago that the paper came out. What are you working on yourself at the moment? Are you still focusing on similar research or things that build on this, or are you looking at other areas at the moment?
Okay, at the moment, I'm working also on digitization. Digitalization and digitization, this is not the same. Processes are something that I'm very curious on, and in the, some years ago, I was very astonished about the positive things, but now maybe it's the age, it's the age factor. I'm more focused on basically the negative effects or the negative uses and the risks and challenges that this provoke to organizations, but also to people. Nowadays, I'm working on the technological dimension of transformative services of nonprofits. How third sector organizations have the capacity to, provide transformative services that can transform they can transform the way of end beneficiaries, but not also the families, and also even the internal stakeholders as workers and so on. how even these nonprofits can co-create these transformative services and products with end beneficiaries or families and so on. So this has to be basically with technological capability, but also with a new way of doing things internally, in the organization and externally. So in this study that is a national one again, and we consider it, the first sector in Spain, very, very broadly, in a very broad sense. We are seeing again that the capacity of, the opportunity to have the choice to make partnerships, for instance, and to create long-term relationships with other strategical partnerships is something absolutely determinant, more than important, absolutely determinant. And for sure to integrate, new ways of approaching to new realities. So, employee engineering, engineers, people, expert in programming, for instance, people, that print in 3D and so on. There are a lot of talents that traditionally work, putting extra motors there, the nonprofits, and now the big ones are assuming that they need to integrate and collaborate together to provide more personalized products and services, and also to reinforce the brand, the value of their brands, and to create long-term relationship of trust to guarantee sustainability. So this is not about financial sustainability, but also about social sustainability. And also non-profits, but the second area of interest of study nowadays are social enterprises, and because they have they share a common playground with non-profits, but they have specific characteristics that make them very, very, very interesting from a point of view. And this is I'm approaching to social enterprises from the perspective of consumption of products and services, but also on the uses of new tools of funding, for instance, and crowdfunding is one of those.
Yeah, really, really interesting to hear. Fascinating topics, and be really interested to find out more. As and when those bits of research are publicly available. And just remains to say thanks ever so much, Noelia, for finding time to come on the podcast. It's really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing, and certainly wish you all the best for the future.
Okay, thank you, Rodri.
Okay, great. Well, my thanks again to all of my guests for finding the time to come on the podcast. It's always really interesting to hear about the research that's going on and what's coming up in the future. I'll put links in the show notes to places where you can find all of the relevant ERNOP research notes, as well as the original journal articles, so you can dig into all of those if you'd like to. If you're interested in issues more broadly in philanthropy and civil society, do check out the website at whyphilanthropymatters.com, where you can find all of the back episodes of this podcast, which is a very much a growing collection. Lots of interesting interviews there and deep dive explorations of various topics. There's also lots of articles, many of them quite long form, some of them shorter form, and also kind of short guides to all kinds of issues in philanthropy and civil society, as well as lots of news updates and things like that. So plenty to get your teeth into there. If you're interested in following me and keeping track of stuff more broadly, do follow me on social media. I'm like most people, I've pretty much left X now. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm also on Blue Sky, so do come and find me there. If you want regular updates, one of the things you can do is sign up via the website for the monthly newsletter that I pull together, which has proven to be pretty popular, where I curate lots of interesting articles and bits and pieces that I find in the course of my work keeping tabs on philanthropy and civil society on a daily basis, and then I can share them with all of you. If you've got ideas for people that I could talk to on the podcast or topics that you'd like me to cover in the coming year, do drop me a line. I'm always really pleased to hear suggestions. Some of you do actually act on this invitation, and I do actually then act on your suggestions. So quite a few of the episodes in the podcast now have come about because of people getting in touch with me. If you feel like you'd like to do that, just find the contact details at the Why Philanthropy Matters website, and please do get in touch. If I don't get back to you immediately, it's not because I'm just horribly rude, it's because I'm massively snowed under with various deadlines at the moment, but I will do my best to respond when I can. Other than that, just subscribe. Please tell all of your friends about the podcast if you think they would be interested, or share it with colleagues. And if you've got the time to leave us a nice review wherever it is you get your podcasts, that would really help boost us up the rankings. So please do that too. And I will see you next time. Bye!